Giuquit, hello. Welcome to the podcast series of the Center for Irish Studies at Villanova University. My name is Joseph Lennon, Emily C. Riley, Director of the Center.
And I'm Jennifer Joyce, Associate Director and Curator of this series. We appreciate the support from our many donors, especially a generous grant from the Connolly Foundation.
This podcast series aims to reflect aspects of Irish studies through the 9 different academic disciplines that are taught through Villanova's Center for Irish Studies. Our faculty and students will engage in discussions with distinguished thinkers, artists, writers, academics, political leaders, and other campus visitors.
We are very excited for our second season of this podcast. Our episodes this year explore current issues about race and dive into traditional song and story. Thank you so much for listening. And if you are looking for more Irish Studies events, please join us virtually this year for a rich menu of programming. You can follow us on social media, find us at our website, or email us at irishstudies@villanova.edu.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with us. I'm here talking with Lillis Ó Laire, who teaches in the School of Irish at National University of Ireland, Galway. He's a Donegal native, but is from Portrayals and studied at NUI Galway and University College Cork. We are here today to talk about the great Sean-nós singer Joe Heaney and some of the songs that can be found on joeheaney.org, a website that Lillis led a team of people to create, which is the Carna, the archives of Joe Heaney's songs. And there's great information about Heaney and about the traditions. Lillis has written several books, one of which, Bright Star of the West, Gra Mucree, Joe Heaney, Irish Songman, came out in 2011. And he did that with Sean Williams. So I thought today we would start, Lillis, just by, first off, welcome, Falcha. And I thought I could just ask you briefly, when did you get interested in Sean-nós singing? You're a Sean-nós singer yourself, and you teach Sean-nós. When did you first start singing?
I suppose I started singing in primary school because the singing was part of the curriculum there. Mm. I wasn't really an active singer, though. It was something I did for class, and I enjoyed it. But I didn't really have an idea that I would be a performer myself. And then I suppose I got that bug when I went to university, really. And I met the professor who was Professor of Irish in Galway at that time. He was there from the mid-70s until 1995. Brendan O'Madagan, and I went to University in Galway in 79-80. That was my freshman year there. So he had sort of musicology on the curriculum, so that he would give us the poems, but he would say it's a travesty not to include the music as well. And these texts are often studied as poems only, but in fact they're songs, and to understand them fully, you need to have an appreciation of the music as well. And then, as an informal thing, not for credit, but just if you were interested, on Tuesday evenings, he would do an hour where he would teach songs. And many people went to those classes, especially foreign visitors who were there maybe for an exchange year or whatever. There wasn't so much of that then, but there were always a few people around who appeared at them. And I began to go to those classes, and I became more and more interested in oral poetry, really. And then, as a consequence of singing in a group, I began to think, well, maybe I could do this myself.
It was great when we had you in class and you sang some of those oceanic lays.
Yeah, you like the oceanic lays.
You don't hear them, I've read them, but to hear them it's an entirely different thing.
Well, we don't really know how they were performed because we don't really have much evidence of it. We have a few tunes. There is one account, again, it was published by O'Madagan about Eugene O'Curry's father Eugene O'Curry was a Clareman. He was born around 1790.
Great scholar.
And he remembers his father going out into the middle of the Shannon estuary with a friend in a little boat, and they bring a keg with them, and they just begin to sip the moonshine and sing the oceanic lays, and the people on either side of the river would come down to hear them sing and he named the tune, I think either Bunting or Petrie, I can't remember which now, have the tune, and it was also used for a hymn, a hymn written in syllabic verse, because of course the oceanic poems are not written in song verse, they're written in syllabic verse.
Right.
So that's why they sound kind of chant-like, because they weren't really ever meant to be that melodic. And I think that was one of the reasons why they were neglected by the collectors. They all sounded the same, and they were pretty boring from them if you're really looking for, melodies.
And yet, Oisin became the giant hit across Europe.
Well, of course he did, yeah.
Pearson.
I mean, that was because of Macpherson, of course, in Scotland.
Right.
And then there was a huge controversy about the originality of those texts. In fact, it was, I mean, Macpherson did a great service because he raised the profile of that kind of that whole body of literature. But I suppose he did play a little bit fast and loose with the facts. So, I mean, they say genius is clever theft. So I think he was a clever thief. But people just didn't want to let him away with that. I suppose if it had been a majority culture, a culture of the victor, that mightn't have happened, or if it had, it mightn't have carried so much importance. But I mean, people, the name Oscar today is not considered an Irish name, and yet it's one of the most Irish names, because Oscar was the son of Oisin.
Sure.
But it's a common name across Europe, and it's
thing.
because of that vogue in the second half of the 18th century that name now, even the Hollywood award, nobody ever thinks of that as a Celtic name or an Irish name, and in fact, that's where it came from.
It's very true, and it's good. Yeah. So let me go back to Joe Heaney. When would you have first encountered Joe Heaney? I remember.
Well, I didn't ever heard of Joe Heaney until I went to university. I was 18 years old, and I was in the first year, and the professor was playing LPs that had just been issued. Like Joe Heaney made an album, a long playing record in 1971, and he made another one in 1976, and those were the things that our professor used to illustrate the song. So he was teaching us about the love song tradition of the Irish language, and he would play Joe Heaney singing them.
My own family, and I was born in Newport, Rhode Island, and Joe Heaney came in 1965 and later in 68 and sang at the Newport Folk Festival.
Yes.
And so people in Newport would know Joe Heaney from as being someone from Ireland who'd come over and really represented this very old way of singing. And I think it was a great surprise to many people.
Well, it was. I mean, the Irish American musical tradition is quite modern and very much built around the music hall and that kind of thing. There is a wonderful account of John McCormack getting very unhappy with the great piper from laoire in County Galway, Patsy Toohey, because Patsy played it up. I mean, he hammed it up on stage. He really did the stage Irishman, and it didn't seem to bother him. He was also an excellent piper.
Right.
But John McCormack found this very offensive and was very distressed by it altogether. Because, I mean, Patsy was just trying to make a living, and he didn't have that middle class sort of privilege.
Vaudeville did a lot, and then afterwards in that tradition.
So, like, people are very sensitive, and I suppose the revival became very sensitive about stage Irishness and Irish American traditions and all of that sort of thing. That somehow they were bowdlerized in some way, and
Yeah.
the whole revival was to try and create this image of Ireland that was respectable and serious and worth studying. And I mean, I understand why it was done, and I would support it as well, because even still, you get people sort of saying, well, the place name, let's say a place name such as Termon Feckin. And I mean, if you say Termon Feckin, nobody thinks of the sanctuary of Saint Festus or
Right.
Saint Fahine. It's some kind of mildly obscene sort of that sort of thing. So I mean, when people laugh at it, I do kind of bristle sometimes, because it's there is that sort of feeling of, what do we have to do to be to be real,
Well,
if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I was just in reading Bright Star, when Heaney comes over in 1965. That's when Dylan went electric at the Newport Folk Festival. So there's always been this clash of, what is the proper domain of folk music, and what is the old, what's more authentic, and the politics around authenticity. But Joe,
that is a really interesting question, and Joe Heaney's life is a kind of an illustration of somebody who tried to be very, very, very authentic.
Yeah.
To his own financial detriment, I think. I don't know if we mentioned Muddy Waters in the book, but certainly I think we do mention him. I would have liked to write more about him, but just it wasn't really on message, so I just mentioned it. He was also came up through the folk movement.
Yeah.
And the
saw him play myself at Newport. Yeah.
And the acoustic guitar was that was what the folkies really admired, and they thought that this urban music with the electric guitar plugging in was really wrong.
Right.
And for a long time, I think Muddy was subscribed to that ideology, because his admirers were in that camp. But in the end, he realized he had to make a living, and he did plug in and played very successfully in the Chicago blues houses, and made a decent living to support his family.
And changed music.
Of course, yeah. I mean, he was amazing. So, and sorry.
No, I was going to say, can you tell us a bit about Joe Heaney's life? Just so
Joe Heaney was born in Galway in October 1919, around about these days now. I'm not sure exactly what day, but some say he was born on October 1st, and I think there's another date of the 15th. But anyway, we're
right at
his birthday he would be 101 this year. Wow. If he were alive. So he was born into a small farming and fishing community, subsistence existence, in a very strongly Irish-speaking area, just west of the village of Carna. There are a number of small townlands on a promontory there, the two most important being Ard East and Ard West. And he was born in Ard East. Mm-hmm. And they were fishermen. They were, not very well off. They had enough to live on, but just about. I mean, there was still hunger and famine in Ireland in the 1920s. But the family they were upwardly mobile as well, because a number of his siblings became teachers. He had a sister, a sister teacher. She lived in Ennis in County Clare. There was a big family, and I suppose any parents then would have decided, well, we'll give you the land and we'll give you this and we'll turn you into, and the rest of you'll have to emigrate, because only one really could inherit the land, and the holding was barely viable as it was. A small rocky land, rocky holding with very little fertile land. So the sea was very important, and fishing was very important to supplement the income. In fact, the whole economy.
See that in his stories.
Yeah, the whole economy was based on boat traffic. The roads weren't very well developed in the 19th century, and boats were, and into the 20th. The boats really were important right up until 1945, and then the roads began to be more important as the combustion engine took over as the normal mode of transport.
I think it was the same all the way. I mean, down in West Cork, it was similar as well. You know, people come in from the sea rather than go over the mountains.
Well, it was easier to travel by sea.
Yeah.
You could do it quicker, and boats weren't terribly expensive. Although they did confer status on the owners as well. There was a lot of status in owning a boat. So his people lived maybe 200-300 yards from the sea, and that's how they lived. He went to school, and I think his talent was noticed at school by the teachers. But he said he never sang publicly until an event in Roundstone, which is just to the west, just across the bay, across Bertraboy Bay there, and made famous by Tim Robinson, of course. And he sang at some kind of an event, maybe it was a wedding, and he sang apparently an English song, because Roundstone is an English-speaking place. There's the island of Inishnee, which is close to Roundstone, and there's some Irish spoken there. But Roundstone is an English-dominant place, even though it's further west in Connemara than Carna. English predominated there earlier, and that's probably due to Nemo and the train going to Clifton, and people bringing the English along with them.
Well, let me ask you about that song. Is it Roxabon that you're thinking of?
Yeah, the Roxabon.
Should we play just a tiny bit of that?
Yeah, we should play a bit of that now.
This is, I mean, it always, he calls it the daddy of all Irish Sean-nós songs.
He does.
Riddled with rocks.
Now
in 16 America.
Excuse me.
Wherever you may be, don't hire with any master till you know what your work will be. For you must rise up early from the clear daylight till the dawn. I'm afraid you'll never be able to plough the rocks of Vaughan and rise up gallant Sweeney and give your horse some hay and give him a good feed the goats before you go away. Don't feed him on soft turnip, put him out on your green lawn, for I'm afraid he'll ne'er be able to plough the rocks of Vaughan.
So those first two stanzas there, with Sweeney, this man and a landlord asking him to put down his pipe, and I guess that's Dudeen. Is that?
Yeah, that's a Dudeen. Yeah, I think that word makes its way into Beckett's "Waiting for Godot," but I'm not sure about that.
And so, "Waiting for Godot," as I always tell my students.
Godot is right. That's very good.
I always thought that's maybe what it, who knows. So,
yeah, it's a possibility. It's certainly not an outlandish suggestion.
Right. So to forever but he says that he wouldn't be able to get up to, and he would never return to plow the rocks of Vaughan.
Yeah, they said it was a press gang song, that it was a recruiting song, that was encouraging them to leave the rocky holdings and join the army, that they'd have a better life than trying to eke out a miserable existence on the land that wasn't very productive in the first place. So, but then it gets subverted in different versions. So some versions say, I wish the Queen of England would send for me in time and place me in some regiment, all in my youth and prime. I'd fight for Ireland's glory from the clear daylight till the dawn, and I never would return again to plough the rocks of Bourne. So that's the kind of press gang verse, if you like, or the recruiter's verse. But then some singers would say, I wish that Patrick Sarsfield would send for me in time. And they would change it all around, you know.
So a Sean-nós song, and yet it's in English. And this people often point to this as, one of the, I don't know, as he says, the daddy of Sean-nós.
Yeah, well, he liked to sing it, and it has a beautiful melody. It's a hexatonic melody. There are other melodies to this song, but the melody that he sings it with has that gapped scale, and it has that feeling of sort of being out there. It's there's a lonesome sound in it.
There is.
That's what he meant when he was talking about that he could convey that sadness and that longing and that homesickness that he sort of carried around with him, and many Irish people carried around with them. The whole thing about emigration was that you could never be happy in a new place. You'd always have to be pining for the place you left behind.
Oh. And so as a young man, then he moved to Scotland.
I think he tried to go to Scotland once in the late 40s, and then returned back and went again the following year, and then stayed. His father had been in Scotland in the early 20th century, and there was a little colony of Carna people still in Clydebank outside Glasgow, and he obviously went over to relatives there, and he met his wife who was Glasgow born and raised, but both of whose parents were from Carna as well. So really, even though he left home, he didn't leave home in a way. He said he never liked Scotland because he found the place quite sectarian against Catholics.
Yeah.
And he began to work more in England, and he fathered 4 children with his wife, Mary, and but began to spend increasing amounts of time in England. And when he was in England, then he met Ewan MacColl, and Ewan MacColl was quite influential on him. And Ewan MacColl was another folk ideologue. He was very much active, and he's an activist for workers' rights and so on. And he linked folk music and sort of left-wing politics.
Got it.
And he had folk clubs, and Heaney was a frequent guest in those folk clubs.
Let's listen to a bit of Bananyan.
Bananyan, yeah, that's...
So this is the opening of it. And this is, again, everyone, this is from the archive, joeheaney.org, that Lillis and others have made such great efforts at making all these songs available. So here's the first 2 verses.
Isairin Ivan Lano No fala de chapin iglis Gotum brinish keba No kartka de chidlan O baim de gol godim madin Shaslan to the valley gilir Ach nor akusen watch trasen balle Bain the kalin is a dashamen Sikirlin me moro Nurikis me mogragal nier Niet megalen laoire, bla medes vi adren rio. Nor is weaning mer is so gross gore. Erinja halavini vi feel, o chiche million dollars. Angus men moron di.
I'll read a bit of the translation. And so arise, landlady, don't delay to fuss with your cap, and get me a drop of whiskey or a quart of your own ale. We'll be drinking until morning, and that's where you hear the great vaulting as it goes up. Here's a health to all the That's it.
That's a brilliant melody.
And when the mistress leaves town, I shall have the prettiest girl.
Yeah,
Oh,
that melody was one of the ones that Beethoven actually arranged.
And then the next verse, oh God, what shall I do tomorrow when I see my love heading east? I can't go up to her because of all that's passed between us. When I think about her playfulness and her laughter and about the work of her generous hands, I fall into black despair and shed many tears for the loss of her.
Yes. Yeah.
There's a great sorrow in the song. And it seems that like Padraig O'Conor, he spent his life leaving places.
There's a lot of Irishmen who did the same.
I think particularly of that generation.
Yes.
In my own family, a very similar story.
Yeah, let's move on, So there is that, it's a very interesting idea of masculinity or portrayal of masculinity, because in our Western sort of hegemonic culture, men aren't shown as being able to weep. And it's interesting, I've been watching Turkish television recently, and there they can do the most sort of violent acts, and at the same time they're not ashamed to cry for their fallen brothers, that sort of thing. And you would never see a man cry in a Hollywood film, but on Turkish television they show it all the time. Yeah. So it's interesting, there's a crying man here too, which is a different idea about there's a tenderness about it and a softness that maybe doesn't always come through in more standard portrayals of masculinity.
Yeah. And so when did he go then to America? I mean, that was when in the 60s.
He went in the early 60s. I think he might have gone to Newport first in 64. And he was over again in 65, and then he went for good in 66.
I see. Yeah.
And then
he worked as a doorman.
The whole in the authenticity stakes, he was always sort of placing himself, and others too were placing him higher than the Clancys. But it was the Clancys who helped him get into America and supported him and found him a job and all that sort of thing. So they were really great friends, even though in the sort of politics of it all, they were different.
Well, the Clancys sold many more records, I assume.
Well, exactly. I mean, I don't know. I don't think they were incredibly wealthy in comparison to real pop stars, but they certainly made a living out of it.
There's not Van Morrison, but still.
Yeah, well, exactly. But they still made more of a living than maybe poor Joe.
And so he worked as a doorman for years, and the story is that he was Merv Griffin's doorman.
He was Merv Griffin's doorman, yeah, and Merv Griffin mentioned him on a show, and I looked for that show. I just wanted to find an archive recording of that show, and I couldn't find it. And I think others searched for it before me, and they couldn't find it either. So we don't think it exists, unfortunately. But it was one of the big.
Someone's archive will open up, and there it'll be.
Yeah.
But,
when he went in, Merv Griffin went into O'Donoghue's bar, and there was a photograph of Joe up on the wall there, and he says, "That's my doorman." And somebody said, "Well, that's one of the greatest singers that ever came out of Ireland." So he went back and he had him on the show after that. That was the story there. Yeah.
right? And so he had religious songs, and I thought I'd play the Keen of the Three Marys.
Yeah.
This is a fairly well-known keen that's sung in.
It's well known now, but it wasn't well known or well thought of before Joe brought it to the fore.
Right. Tell us. So he would have been the innovator of this then.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of religion, the Paul Cullen era religion.
Yeah.
This is the Irish language. This is the folk tradition of the people that, you know, was sustained unofficially, and it's not liturgical at all, but that was all replaced in the second half of the 19th century, in the aftermath of the famine, by the novenas and the first Fridays and the rosaries and increased mass attendance as well.
Now,
before that, the religious practice, since the penal laws, was very strongly built around the holy wells and the patron saint days. And this is a tradition that's reflected across Europe, but it was suppressed by the recovering church.
Sure. This is a very personal element to it. I mean,
it's very personal. I mean, she's talking about his mother is speaking, and she's talking about his feet being pierced and his bones being broken, the blunt nails that are piercing his hands and feet, the crown of thorns, the blood's flowing down. I mean, the film that Mel Gibson made a number of years ago, which is so graphic as to be sort of disturbing, there's an element of that in this description as well.
This is the Pietà as well.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
It's an older Catholic tradition, and he was the one who brought it back and refused not to sing it. You know, he really felt very proud that people began to sing this.
Right, and his grandmother sang this. Is that?
Yeah, she did, and other women in the village sang it too.
So just before I play it, the last line strikes me. Also, and tell me if I have this right. This is the women of my song that are not yet born, or
the women that will weep for me have yet to be born.
Women who will weep for me have yet to be born. So there's a sense of futurity here.
Yes, exactly.
That it's not just the mourning of the past. This is mourning of people right now.
Yeah, because of religion and because of and misunderstandings and whatever. Maybe it's also a reference to the fact that Christian idea that the Jews would suffer because of having crucified Jesus. It was something that we were told when we were young anyway. I don't believe it anymore, of course, but it was. I think it was there as some kind of
anti-Semitism.
It's a kind of prophecy kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay, so here it is. Sorry, cut it there at the word. It strikes me just as a, I mean, the the refrain and the frequency of the refrain, and the ochon, and it's the kind of keen that one would read about as that we don't have words for, that we would read about in that English observers would make of keens and funeral processions.
Yeah, well,
The only words we would have left are ochon, ochon, you know.
Yeah. The ochon. Well, apparently, the keens were there was at least 2 parts and probably 3 parts to the keens as extemporized over the corpse. So there was a kind of a short period where they'd be murmuring to themselves, maybe just repeating the deceased's name, and then they would burst out into a short verse which had a melodic content, and then the ochon would start, and the whole assembly then would take up the chorus. So that's my old professor O'Madigan sort of proposed that theory, and I think he was right about it.
That makes sense.
Then we have no real. There is one recording made in Carna in the 1980s of a woman crying at the graveside of someone dead, but she was quite an old woman, and she was on her own, and it doesn't have any great dramatic sort of interest, but it's very interesting to find that felt she had to do it. It was something that emotionally, it was a necessary thing. It was the right response at that particular time. So that was beaten out of the people, or people became civilized,
Quote unquote.
Quote unquote is right, and they became ashamed of behaving in this dramatic way, that it was sort of naive and primitive and so on.
And it's a shame because the performance of grief really works people through the stages of grieving.
Oh, absolutely, yes. So that's repetition. It's very cumulative. It builds up the whole time, and the story goes on. It's pictures of him. He's being chased by his enemies. He's hanging on the tree of passion. Are you the child I carried 9 months, 3 seasons? Are you the child that was born in the stable? Are you the child that was nursed in Mary's breast? Your nose and your mouth are cut. They are bleeding. They hoisted him up on high shoulders, and they beat him down on the flagstones of the street. They sent him to Calvary, increasing his passion. He was carrying the crucifix, and Simon was walking behind him. They put blunt nails through his hands and feet. They put the spear through his beautiful breast. Listen, mother, do not be distressed. The women who will weep for me have yet to be born.
Oh, it's such a sad ending.
Yes.
It's 18 hours.
These were sung by women on Good Friday.
Yeah.
Because obviously that's the most important time in the year for Christians is the crucifixion and the resurrection. So this was the folk way of observing that. And there's a whole lot of folklore around Good Friday about not doing anything, and it was a strict holiday, and there was strict fasting as well on Good Friday.
I find that Whitley Stokes's The Tripartite Life of St. Patrick is fascinating for all of the rituals and the patterns that were recorded for around feast days and saints' days, but also for the religious days.
Yeah.
I mean, they were tremendous festivals as well, and community events.
Well, the patterns were kind of a popular sort of realization of all that. The feast days at the Saints' Day at the Holy Well, and those were quite devout occasions, but they were also very secular. And one of the things that really appalled visitors were always, that was another thing. Like, people used to come to Ireland, and the top 10 things, just like the Lonely Planet nowadays, would be see this, and this, and keening, and a pattern would be 2 of those things that people would be sort of making wonder at, looking at the savage Irish.
Sure. Well, sure. If I come to Mayo, people always ask me if I'm going to knock as well.
Yeah, well, that's a controlled 19th century sort of manifestation of it, and it's much more decorous and well behaved. So yeah,
organized.
So
let's have just time for one more song, but this is a strange one to include in a sense because Johnny Shog, it's not Johnny Joyce. This is not a song that we have a recording of, and I thought maybe you could sing a bit of it.
I will sing a bit of it. He did have a famine song that was kind of a bit of a makey-uppy thing, and it was almost a cover for this song because he didn't like to sing this song. This song is still quite controversial in Carna, even though it's now permissible to sing it publicly. But for a long time, it was not permissible to sing it publicly, and it was only sung in very restricted gatherings. The first person to record it significantly was not a Carna man. It was Seamus Ennis, who recorded it from Joe Heaney's cousin. And then he put it on a record in the 1960s, and after that, the prohibition was broken. And everybody sings it now because it's a fine melody and it is a great story.
So, cut us on scale. What's the story?
The story is supposed to be this. It's some versions it's a man, or some versions it's a woman looking for alms. Johnny Shog was the bailiff, and he had the permission to allow people into the workhouse or give them charity or alms of some kind. And he was not very highly regarded because he was considered to be mean and parsimonious. And this song, on one level, sometimes it's considered to be a song of praise for him or a flattering song to try and get him to part with some of his charity. And in another telling of the story, it's a satire on himself because he was having an affair with a local woman, even though he was married to somebody else. So it's a kind of
prohibition,
holding him up to shame and to censure, if you know what I mean. Yeah, it's a satire.
Yeah. Well, could you sing it for us?
I will. I actually did my colleague Mary McPartin, who died earlier in the year. She was in charge of arts programming for the university performance series every year, and we were going to record it together, and I made a verse translation of it in English for her. But I'll sing the Irish verse now anyway, and it has a really big soaring melody like Banayana. Sa Johnny Shog tig mochas is metach let dochus wieder yen. Maar is toen reil tolish budische lochren daar werk ma hula rogone. Stublane hogestische lochren daar werk ma hula rogone. Agus esocht hidi storgam relief nu gegater ihe nalken. So it's one of those big soaring melodies.
Love it. I love it. I mean, I could listen all day. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the reviews of our book
to it as well. There's a serious bite to this.
Well, there is, yeah. One of the reviews we got said we couldn't be sure that it was in the 1840s that this happened, because it sounded more like something that happened in 1880, when there was another sort of minor famine in Ireland, if a famine can ever be minor.
Yeah.
So the reviewer criticized us for not doing our homework or historical sort of corroboration properly. But that's okay. I mean, it's the story that's important, I think, at this point. I mean, I would like to be able to date it precisely, but it's not really the important part of the story.
So how do you translate that, the opening then?
Oh, Johnny Joyce, understand, listen to my voice as I come to you with hope. I can't remember the verse translation now, and I wish I had looked it up before we started the talk. I can send it to you later.
Yeah.
For you are the star of knowledge, the brightest one that I ever saw. You're the flower of youth. You're the most handsome person I've ever seen in the house of God, in the temple of God. And for Christ's sake, give me relief until Christmas night has passed. Christmas Eve, I suppose.
And so the story is that the man was going to the workhouse to get food for his family.
Yes.
Or
the woman, yeah.
The woman, yeah.
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 And that there was so much death in that, in that time.
Yes.
This was in the 1880s. But the contrast between the man's very personal sorrow and being able to satirize at the same time, it's striking that I think people often don't think that when they would hear a Sean-nós song, they get the grief, but they don't know, we might not get the bite of the satire.
Well, it's just that those modal melodies are very, very powerful. And they have that, they really do catch the ear. They're not built around the three chords or a harmonic progression. They're really sort of strong solo melodies in a different idiom to the kinds of music that prevail in the West now.
So how do you, let me just ask this, I sing songs to my children and have since they were very young. And I'm not a singer, and I'm not a good singer, but I love music. How do you memorize, or how do you catch these tunes? Is it just, would these be tunes that some of the elements would be repeated in different songs, or?
Yeah, they are formulaic in some ways. There's an awful lot of songs, and they have the same melody really, but just there's a few notes changed, and because of the way they're changed, you mightn't recognize immediately the similarity.
And so Joe Heaney was said to have 500 songs. It's quite a lot of songs.
Well, I mean, I don't think any singer has 500 songs at the top of their hat. You know, it would take a while to get them all together, and
right.
You know, you need to think about them and bring them forward. He was always looking in books and things like that, but he didn't like people thinking that he was somebody who depended on books, because he was well aware of the ideology of that old tradition was superior, and so he always tried to say the old tradition, I got it from my grandmother. And like there's a song called I Wish I Had Someone to Love Me, which wasn't written until the 1920s, and he said his grandmother had that, you know, so you can catch him out now and again, but that doesn't really take away from his great achievement. He made this art form something very special by winning the National Endowment of the Arts Award in the 1980s. He was nominated by some of his friends who were the university professors, Lieberman and other people who were very, very good to him. And with some other artists and musicians, Lydia Mendoza, who was a Chicana, artists from Texas, and there were others who were nominated that day, who were well known on the scene, but that recognition was really important for proletarian, for kind of folk cultures.
Yeah. Well, and Lillis, you deserve much recognition yourself.
Well, you're certainly doing your bit, Joseph.
Well, for all of your songs, for your knowledge, for your teaching, your insights, your performances, and your scholarship. So we're very grateful that you took the time to spend and that we could have this chat. I'm very grateful.
It was a real pleasure, and I hope you'll call when we can travel again, that you'll come to Galway and we'll meet up in person again.
That's right. That's right. Well, so thank you everybody for listening, and please go to joeheaney.org, and you can look through the archive yourselves to find many wonderful recordings and a lot of wonderful information. So, thanks very much, and
Gur maith go taine, Joe, agus fáilte over ar fad. Goodbye now.
bye.